So a brief introduction of our two panelists here. Aaron Aradillas is a San Antonio-based critic and blogger whose work has appeared in Slant Magazine, IndieWire, and with the Museum of the Moving Image, and his writing for video essays has also made its appearance on Press Play. And Matt Zoller Seitz is the author of the Wes Anderson Collection and is a recently appointed editor-in-chief RogerEbert.com. He's a critic for Vulture.com, written for the Museum of the Moving Image, and is the founder of the Press Play video blog. So, thank you again. Thank you. So, I guess first, Matt, let me ask you, as somebody who's had a long relationship with Wes Anderson, your first experience really was seeing the short film of Bottle Rocket, I believe, which they took to Sundance, Wes and Owen Wilson, and you wrote the very first professional review of that short. What was it in that short 10-minute long film, which is an extra on the Bottle Rocket Criterion DVD if you ever see it, what was it in that short 10-minute film that you saw that said, you know, boy, this is really surprising and engaging?
Well, there were a number of things, but one of them was the fact that I spent most of my life in Dallas. And I had seen movies that had been, I had seen movies that had been shot in Dallas, but, I had seen movies that had been shot in Dallas, but I had never seen a movie that had been shot in Dallas that really used Dallas as Dallas and kind of made it more than Dallas. That was a new thing. I was used to seeing things like Logan's Run and RoboCop, where they shoot the movie in Dallas, and it's not necessarily Dallas, it's just sort of standing in for the horrible future that we all dread. But this was different, and this was by, Wes Anderson had grown up in Houston. He went to the University of Texas at Austin, which is where he met Owen Wilson, who was a classmate of his. And Owen and Luke Wilson were from Dallas, and Wes settled there after he went to UT, and that was where they ended up making their first film together, the short film Bottle Rocket. And the really remarkable thing about it to me was I saw in that 12 minutes or so all of these locations that I knew. I saw Deep Ellum, I saw Greenway Parks, I saw the book stop at North Park Mall, and all these places where I had been, but they didn't look exactly as they did in life. There was something enchanted about them. And I thought, okay, any director who can make a book stop at North Park Mall seem like an interesting place is a talent to be reckoned with. And on top of that, it was in black and white. It had a sensibility of a French New Wave film from the late 50s or early 60s. And everything about it was very kind of cosmopolitan or European or old or new somehow at the same time. And I just thought, all right, this must be directed by some, 40, 50-year-old film professor somewhere. And it turns out it was a guy my age. And that was kind of mind-blowing. So I thought I should write a little piece about this, because clearly this guy and Owen Wilson, his writing partner, and Luke Wilson, there's something about these guys, and they're going places, so I should write about them now. And I wrote a little piece about the short film, and then a few months later, when they were looking for funding to do a feature film, I wrote a longer piece about them, interviewed them at the Stoneleigh P, I don't know if any of you know where that is, in Dallas, great burgers. They still don't serve ketchup, though. There's something a little perverse about that after all these years. But then when they did get money from Columbia to make the feature film version, I followed the making of that from start to finish. And I love this factoid, but at the time when it was finally published, this piece, which I spent months working on, it was the longest cover story ever published in Dallas Observer. And it was just insanely long. I mean, people looked at it and said, this is too long, this story. There's anecdotes in there that are like, the ironic thing was I asked my editor, I said, don't you want to cut this part where the landlord is crying over his dead boa constrictor? And she said, no, that's the best part. And I stayed in touch with Wes over the years. He shot Rushmore. He went on to shoot Rushmore in Houston. By that point, I had moved to New York City with my wife, and Bottle Rocket did not do so well. And there was some question as to whether or not he was going to be able to make another movie. A lot of people wondered about that because he had skipped. He had gone directly to Go, and he'd gotten a real budget. He had real actor James Caan in the movie. It big production, and the studio dumped it. They got a couple of bad test screenings, and they moved it. They dumped it in January or February of the following year. No press, nothing. He called me in New York at that point and said, "Hey, I'd like to invite you to the New York premiere of Bottle Rocket." And I was really excited, and my wife and I went to see it at this multiplex in Lower Manhattan. And I thought there were going to be lights out front, but no, what he meant was it was opening in New York. It was opening in New York, and he thought I might want to go see it on opening day, maybe get the box office up or something. But there was no one there. It was just people buying tickets to go. And we were like there were like 8 people. But then Rushmore came out, and I knew as soon as I saw Rushmore that everything was going to be fine, that he was going to have a career, because it was an extraordinary leap forward in terms of its ambition and its assurance. And I joked beforehand that every time I see Wes Anderson's movies, as many times as I've seen them, I notice new things. And I noticed like 5 or 6 new things here. And I hope I wasn't rude, but I kept turning around to my editor, Aaron Aradillas, and saying, "Did you see that?" Anyway, that was a really rambling answer.
Aaron, what was your first experience with seeing something of Wes Anderson? What were your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. Bottle Rocket never played here in San Antonio. Never played here in San Antonio. And so, and then Wes Anderson got the Future Filmmaker Award from the MTV Movie Awards. And I remember that to the point to when that happened. I was like, who is that? Because I didn't hear the film, and I never heard of the person. And apparently MTV is anointing this person for Bottle Rocket. And even Siskel and Ebert didn't review the film. So I didn't know the film. So first time I heard it was in late December of '98. There was a critic screening of Rushmore here. Maybe about half a dozen people in a morning screening. I was easily the youngest by about 30 years. So, you know, I was 20 at the time. And so I was the youngest in the screening room. And I was and the other critics, they liked it, but I was easily the one who came out loving it. And then it didn't go, that was an early screening, and it didn't go wide until February. It opened in New York and LA, one week in December to qualify for Oscars. And so then in February, wide, big weekend, and I remember I took all my friends to it. I was like, we gotta see this film. There was a promo screening. I was like, we gotta see Rushmore, we gotta see Rushmore. You know, I got the soundtrack and CD, and for all of our groups, it was like one of those, kind of one of those flashpoint moments, because it was like our graduate, because, you know, because this is one of those films that you get it, you identify with Max Fisher's, and, you know, we're 20, so we think we're more mature than what we are, but you identify with Max Fisher's immaturity and his, you know, his creativity, even though probably his ambition is greater than his talent. And so it's just the whole sensibility of it. You got the sensibility. It was the sensibility of someone young, you know, who you got the references, the Peanuts, the Salinger, the oldies music, but the hip oldies music. It wasn't you know, the oldies that you knew. It was the archival stuff, and it had a smart sensibility. Seeing Wes Anderson movies like that and starting it, you feel smart all the time.
It's interesting that you mentioned The Graduate, because I mean there's several visual references to The Graduate in here. Even when Jason Schwartzman's saying goodbye, and there's the rain behind him, and it's almost just like that wet goodbye Benjamin in The Graduate as well.
Well, even the pool, and obviously the pool scenes, and the whole this forbidden May-December romance that goes on, but he kind of inverts it a little. He inverts it obviously in that it goes from resistance to, by the end, the ending always gets me. It's very poetic, and they, he finally has matured to a point where Mrs. Cross can accept him as someone who's entering young adulthood. And so, in a weird way, visually, he does get the girl in this final day. And then, of course, the lyric that we hear, the moment the screen goes black, the credits is, I wish I knew then what I knew now when I was younger. And to me, that just sums up the whole movie.
That's true. That's very true. It's funny, you mentioned The Graduate. You both mentioned The Graduate. I'm sitting there thinking about The Graduate. How can you not think about The Graduate when you watch this movie? But also, not just because of all the visual and thematic shout-outs to The Graduate, but also in the sense that The Graduate was for people of the boomer generation, for a lot of them, that movie, Easy Rider, Bonnie and Clyde, and a handful of other films. These were the movies that young people got. And a lot of people who were older did not get those movies. They thought they were baffling, off-putting, or just bad. And they were seen and enjoyed and championed by mostly younger people. And I feel like Rushmore was a movie like that. And it was a movie that it was not a financial success. It had a few critical defenders, notably Dave Keir, who at the time was writing for the New York Daily News. I think he picked that as his #1 movie of 1998, which even at the time, as much as I liked Rushmore, I thought, oh, that's a pretty bold choice. But this is a movie that was, everybody I know who was in their 20s, through early 30s, who saw this movie went, okay, there's something really, really special about this movie, something very original about this movie. And so it was it occupied that kind of place for people. That sort of place that's occupied by other movies of the 90s, such as Pulp Fiction, I think. And it's just an endlessly quotable, endlessly rewatchable, I think, perfect film.
When it came out a couple of months before, because it came out in February of 1999, or late year 99, and we're like 2 months later, Election comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So you just like, you literally got these two iconic films about, teen youth and just youthful ambition, and they just kind of spoke to that whole generation. But I remember I was having a conversation with you, Matt, and your daughter, Hannah, one time. I guess she was asking us of our favorite Rushmore movies, or whatever, or the one that we watched the most. And you made a comment that Rushmore was Wes Anderson's Goodfellas.
Yeah.
And I think, and I understood when you said that, I got that, because what it is, it's one of these films. I mean, some people here probably have not seen it, but there's probably some people like me and Matt who have obviously seen it, dozens of times. But like Goodfellas, it's one of those films. It'll be on HBO for a couple of months, where you'll be channel surfing and you'll watch 20 minutes of it, and you'll
I'm never able to just watch 20 minutes.
And then like 3 days, and then 3 days later, Rushmore comes on again, and you'll watch another 20 minutes, even though you've just seen it. I mean, chances are if it's on TV in 2 weeks, I'll probably stop and watch 20 minutes of it.
Well, the pacing of it is also pretty extraordinary. It's a very tight movie. It's very, and I like to say of Wes Anderson that Wes Anderson, although his movies are very contemporary in their look and their style, and just the way that they put all these different influences and component parts together, ultimately he feels like an old filmmaker to me. He feels like a classic filmmaker. And if you watch a movie that was made prior to the 1960s, when they started experimenting with pacing, there was an incredible push to be tight above all else, and that's why old movies, and it was partly because they wanted to fit movies into double bill. They didn't like things to go longer than 90 or 100 minutes, but Rushmore is 98 minutes, including the credits. And it feels like a longer film, but in a good way. Like, you look at how much time has elapsed when you get to the end of Rushmore, and I remember the first time I came out of it, I looked at the clock, and I looked at my watch, and I thought, oh, my watch is broken. This can't be right, but it was. And it reminds me, watching this movie again reminds me of watching something like Casablanca, or The Third Man, or The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, or Duck Soup, or just some great old movie where a character needs to go from point A to point B, they do it, and it takes 45 seconds, and you're in there. There's some scenes in this movie that are like 10 seconds long, 15 seconds long, and they give you a little bit of information, and that's it.
Could you talk a little bit about because I think you mentioned it right before the picture started, that this is the movie that kind of solidified really Wes Anderson's style. And one of the things that I think you notice as you watch all his films is just how tightly controlled they are. And there's a similarity in the framing of the way people are in the shots. Yes. And there's a lot of space on the sides of people, and the use of this widescreen frame, and a lot of precise shots of things on tables and stuff like that. Talk about his visual style and basically just how he puts together his films.
Well, he's very much a planner, and he likes to leave room for accidents, but he's very, very meticulous in the way that he plans his movies out. And he thinks about, if you look at the book or if you look at any articles about Wes Anderson, you may see his storyboards. His storyboards look remarkably like the movie that you end up seeing on the big screen. And he doesn't like to cut a lot. There, occasionally you get a sequence like the quick one while he's away montage, where there's a lot of cutting and it's fast and funny, but he more often prefers to block the scene, write the scene, block the scene, and then let the actors do their thing and follow them around with the camera. And he almost blocks the scene the way Woody Allen does, where you'll see, sometimes you'll see two characters talking, maybe they're in the same shot, maybe you're looking at one of them and you're hearing the other one, and you know, the other one who's off screen will be talking and you'll be looking at somebody listening. That's something that modern filmmakers are terrified of doing. And it drives me crazy, because when I watch the way that Hollywood movies are made now, and the way a lot of television shows are made now, it seems like they cover it with like 14 cameras. And they feel obligated to let, like if there's 6 people in a scene, you'll see somebody start talking and then they'll cut to the other 5 people, so you can make sure that you know exactly what they're feeling as the other person talks. It's like they're just scared or something. And Wes Anderson is not like that. He makes decisions and he sticks to them, and I really admire that. And I think it has an effect. It makes his movies feel solid. They feel solid, like a well-built table and chair feels solid. You know, you're going to sit on them and they're not going to break. You know?
And this film, it's funny, I think Rushmore, I think of Rushmore as a horizontal film. It does the framing is horizontal, where the Falling from Royal Tenenbaum, I consider that a vertical film. And so it's floors, you know, going up and down. And so he kind of does the framing, at least with those two films in particular, you know, going left to right and doing the frame that way, or top to bottom, filling the frame that way. But either way, he's going to fill the frame and give you all this information.
And where did you get this idea of, and you'll really see it in the Royal Tenenbaums and in Life Aquatic as well, this whole kind of dollhouse concept where you'll pan across or go vertically, like you said, Aaron, through all these rooms and see what everybody is doing in all these in their various little life areas.
Well, he actually, it's funny, he told me the story when I was interviewing him for the book. I asked him about, I call them his dollhouse shots, and where the camera is sort of tracking laterally or up and down, and it looks like a wall is cut away from the building or room, so it's like your Superman with X-ray vision looking into it. And he said that it came about in this film, and it's the aquarium groundbreaking sequence where you hear those Benny Goodman-esque, it sounds like Sing, Sing, Sing playing, and they're moving all around, and there's Magnus giving him the finger, and there's people with chainsaws about to cut down trees. That was a response to the fact that he originally had intended to shoot in the other direction. There was a big, beautiful baseball diamond, and it was all green, and he wanted to stage the action looking at the baseball diamond. The night before, there was a torrential downpour, and the field turned to mud. And because it was a fairly low-budget movie, he couldn't just wait and get that shot after they didn't have money to fix the field, let alone delay shooting. So he had to turn the camera around and shoot towards the bleachers, and it wasn't as attractive a shot. He thought, what can I do to make this shot more interesting? And he decided to move the camera around and block the actors so that there were 14 things going on in the background at all times. And he liked the results so much that he decided that he was going to do it on purpose in the next movie, and he was going to plan it. And things got more and more elaborate to the point where you get to the Life Aquatic, and there's this incredible shot in Life Aquatic where Steve Zissou, the Cousteau-like character, says, let me tell you about my boat. And he takes you on a guided tour of this boat, which is a freighter that has been chopped in half. It's like you've been cut in half from stem to stern, and you're prowling around, you're going up through all these rooms, and it's just amazing. And Darjeeling Limited, there's one in there where they're moving through the compartments of a train car, but the different people in the train car, it's not an actual train, it's like a dream space, and you see each room contains a character from a different part of the movie, and they're in a room from a different part of the movie, and it's like it's completely figurative space. And it's just one example of how Wes Anderson continues to evolve and challenge and try to top himself, where, this humble little sort of tracking shot with the aquarium groundbreaking in Rushmore, which came about because he didn't get to shoot what he wanted to shoot. Within a couple of more movies, he's doing this thing where you're sort of breaking all the rules of time and space, and it ends with a shot of a puppet, a puppet tiger and puppet bushes. It's just nuts.
And one other thing about the way he puts his films together, I just love the way he uses music. in movies. Everything from the composer's score of Mark Mothersbaugh in these early films to Alexandre Desplat in his most recent films, which Desplat just writes gorgeous music, I think.
Yeah, he does.
And then of course the source music that he's using, seeming to just layer over the perfect song in the perfect moment. Something that you alluded to as well, Aaron, in his use of music.
Yeah, it's, I mean, even Bottle Rocket, which I assume, he did have a budget, but he, that's mostly score. But the key scene, the big factory getaway at the end where Owen Wilson's running around, and that's scored to 2000 Man by the Rolling Stones. And so even when you see Bottle Rocket, which is, like I said, so low budget, and there's no, only James Caan that and then this obscure Stone song comes on, and it just gives it a new energy. And here, all that British invasion music in this film, it just accentuates kind of, because all British invasion music was pretty, snot-nosed, anti-authority take on American rock and roll. And so, and even though Max Fisher thinks that he's more refined and probably dignified, and he's probably considers himself like a connoisseur of Bach and Django Reinhardt, even though he probably doesn't know except for like the greatest hits. But the British invasion stuff, that's more of his attitude. That is what he's feeling inside, that restlessness. The Who song, the Creation song, that's Max's sensibility. And so we basically get that from Making Time at the beginning, when we see all these clubs, and then we get those contemplative ones like a summer breeze, Concrete by Chadwick Jeremy, and that's also Max's kind of wounded, where he's kind of wounded and kind of vulnerable. So all those British things are sensible to Max's inner.
Well, and he's very sophisticated in the way that he chooses a song, which it adds. So many filmmakers use music in kind of a boringly obvious, literal way, where the hero is sad because he lost his girlfriend, and there'll be a song on the soundtrack by a guy who lost his girlfriend. Like, that's the extent of the imagination a lot of filmmakers have when they use music. And Wes Anderson, like Martin Scorsese and Spike Lee and some other people, Quentin Tarantino's another one, who really are clever, and they're deeper. They go several layers deeper than they're going to with their choice of the song. And just one example of that is a quick one while I was away, which is, if you listen to lyrics of that song, it's about what it seems to be about. But when it's used in that montage, there's all these other sort of associations that it calls up. And remember, Bill Murray's character is being cuckolded. And that's one of the reasons why he's so depressed, is his wife is sleeping with another man who was glimpsed in a couple of very brief shots in that four sequence. So there's that echo, and then there's also the secretive affair between him and Miss Cross, which activates Max's anger. And then on a much deeper level, all of these characters are haunted by loss, and in particular, Miss Cross is haunted by the death of her husband. And Max is, in many ways, strangely kind of represents the son that she never got to have. There's all this fascinating kind of obliterating of boundaries going on in the relationship between those two characters. And I was thinking about a quick one while I was away, like who is the he who is away? Well, it's her husband too. That's who Herman Bloom is filling in for.
And that sequence is all about, because it's done over the sequence where Max and Herman are like getting revenge on each other. They're both like, one-upping each other, the bike, and then he's doing the brakes. But the key refrain, he times the song to where it's, we hear, "You are forgiven."
Right.
For the most of it. And it goes to that. It says Scorsese, ironic counter.
Which, and it also foreshadows where the story eventually ends up.
Yeah.
But not in an obvious way. That's the great thing about it.
Let me take you into the book here before we open it up to audience questions, and say that Wes Anderson is obviously a filmmaker who's got a lot more in him, a long career ahead of him still. And so, what made you say, well, now is the time that I want to do this book, Matt, with him, which is a long form interview in the book, as well as a series of essays that are wonderfully illustrated as well.
Thank you. Well, it was primarily a matter of serendipity. I did this series of video essays for the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens called The Substance of Style. It was a 5-part series of short videos that looked at Wes Anderson's stylistic influences and showed how he took particular influences, Peanuts cartoons, the movies of Orson Welles and Francis